Greetings, everyone. Welcome to this week's Real Talk. I'm your host, Sister Zakia Sankar Jabbar, and we're starting a little early this week. So thank y'all for hopping in and joining us. Do us a favor, hit the thumbs up button, and also share. This is going to be a really, really good conversation, I promise. We're talking about Pan-Africanism or perish in that context, and we're really going to unpack what that means. But I'm excited to be joined by Brother Tyrone. Is that how you say your name? I should have said that.
Tyrone.
Yeah. Yeah, Tyrone. We say Tyrone in America, just so you know.
Yeah,
so American people go be like Tyrone.
The Erica way, that's the way. Proper Tyrone in there, yeah.
Right. So we started a little early to accommodate our brother who is in the UK. So speaking of Pan-Africanism, we try to practice that here all the time, not just talking about it, but we certainly try to live it as well. So thanks so much for joining us at this early time. Again, please hit the thumbs up button, share this broadcast so we can beat YouTube's algorithms. Unfortunately, YouTube tends to shadow ban pro-Black sites, and they don't help us at all. So anyway, we have to do our own thing and making sure we circulate good conversations like this. So, Brother Tyrone, welcome and thank you for joining us. I know it's a little late where you are. I'm really, really excited about having you here on the channel. Can you just start off by just sharing a little bit more about yourself? Share, how you got started with Boukman Academy.
Yeah. So for those that don't know me or don't know my organization, my name's Tyrone. I'm the founder of Boukman Academy, which is a Pan-African organization and Black education platform. To be honest, there's not much more to me than that. Staunch Pan-Africanist, born and raised in London, but trying to make as many Pan-African connections as possible. But in terms of how we got started at Boukman Academy, do you want the full sort of conscious journey, or do you want to just speak specifically about the
You know what, we can hop right into it. Yeah, that was going to be my next question, sort of the full conscious journey, but you can marry the two.
We'll marry the two, because I've been kind of thinking about it myself. I'm not even actually sure, but I came to the conclusion that I think I was given a base level of consciousness through listening as a child to Black music. I think Black music opened the doors to consciousness, to race pride, to a lot of African scholarship, a lot of revolutionary people. So, the likes of Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, Burning Spear, Marvin Gaye, even, some of Michael Jackson's songs that, to us today might not be quite as radical as we thought they were when we were younger, but, it all helps. From there, I got, as a young kid, into a lot of hip hop, conscious hip hop. Obviously, Tupac was the first one to sort of draw me in. I always say he's the most influential and most potent MC of all time. So again, listening to music, and then I started getting probably towards more of a teenager. I started analyzing mainstream music, what was on MTV, or over here it was on 4 Music and The Hits. These were the music channels at the time. And I was sort of thinking, why is this image of Blackness portrayed in a particular light when there's so much more of this great music that was coming before? We don't really see it. People aren't aware of it. I started trying to sort of analyze why in my 14-year-old head. So obviously I didn't have all the answers, but I was sort of thinking, there must be a reason for this. Getting a bit older, you start to sort of realize who is controlling the music industry, their motives, why they are putting out certain images, the propaganda that comes with that, and the power that comes with that. So then from there, you do some more digging, you start getting more conscious artists, you start listening to more. And then I came across a lot of, through YouTube, to be fair, a lot of conscious people that were also musicians, and conscious people from the UK that were also musicians. So shout out to, if anyone's from the States and don't know him, a man like Akala. He's a fantastic MC, but he's also a Pan-African scholar. He's written books. If you don't know him, check him out. Akala. So he was one of the major influences early on, giving me sort of the tools to understand what was really going on in a political sense. From there, it's sort of natural. You then go into watching videos of Malcolm X, speeches of Malcolm X. From there, you're getting into Marcus Garvey, far more deep. And then it sort of occurred to me that, you know what, if I really want to get serious about understanding the world, I got to start reading and educating myself and digging hard into the scholarship. And from there, it just kind of snowballed. And so I think the first Black Studies book I actually bought and read for myself was Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. And that was just like, it's kind of heavy for
oh, that wasn't too long ago.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It within the last, 7 years, something like that?
Yeah,
so
between
recent.
7 and 10 years, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm like, I mean, it's quite a heavy book to start with, but it's given me so much information about United States history with regards to African enslavement, the Constitution, the formulation of formal Jim Crow, the mass incarceration system. It's to be honest, it was a bit too much information for me at the time. I've since revisited that book many, many times. But from there, you then, you just bounce around. You go to different books. You go to the revolutionary literature, whether it's, the autobiography of Malcolm X, whether it's revolutionary suicide, whether it's anything by Marcus Garvey or on Marcus Garvey, whether it's, Kwame Nkrumah, and you just continue to absorb knowledge. And then I got to a point where I was realizing how few of us actually know about this stuff, much less understand it.
So true.
So I thought, as particularly at my age at the time, which was probably must have been about 23, I think, at the time. I was thinking, not many people, at least in the UK at the time, are fully engaged with this fantastic scholarship of the revolutionaries, the scholars that have gone before us.
So it's safe to say you didn't have any African American history courses in your K through 12 experience in London.
There was less than nothing. Like when we talk about the UK school system, when I was in school anyway, absolutely disgraceful when it comes to anything that is non-European. And even within that, 90% of the information that is disseminated is upper class European. So we're learning in history class about, Henry VIII. I'm going off on a bit of a tangent here, but we're learning about the upper classes of Europe that basically invented everything, discovered everything, even in subjects that are not related to history. In maths, we have the Greek alphabet, we have the Roman numerals, we have Indian numbers, but they don't tell you that. They fail to mention that, but they tell you, oh, we're using this Greek numeral lambda for, you know what I mean? Even in English class, all the great literature, everything's European, everything's white. RE, they're using which is religious education. They're using, the white Jesus as the symbol of, morality and goodness. And it's just, it's terrible. I think there wasn't even an extracurricular class until I was 15, I believe, when, shout out to one of my teachers, Mr. Parry, he actually tried to implement an extracurricular Black history, some sort of class. But yeah, the education system in the UK is absolutely disgraceful when it comes to, and then again, it's expected, isn't it? Why would white people want to teach?
Right. John Henry Clark said that, yeah.
It's a logical thing. So you almost can't even blame the system for protecting itself in that way. But in terms of looking at it from our perspective, yeah, you're not going to learn anything. So that, coupled with the fact that not enough of us even knew about the great scholars, if I go talk about Amos Wilson with anyone, they've never heard of him. Talk about Tony Martin, they've never heard of him. Talk about Michelle Alexander, talk about Marimba Ani. None of these great scholars were being heard of by people around me and my age. So I started thinking, how can I get their information across to people without them feeling the need to purchase and read these huge texts, which, if you're not an avid reader, is daunting, to be honest. Like
very much so, especially Marimba Ani's work. I'll be honest with you, exactly. I am still not through that book.
Oh, that's one of my favorite Black Studies books of all time. That's got to be top 3 my favorite Black Studies books. Incredible. But again, that is a complex book. That takes a lot of time and dedication, prior knowledge of history, prior knowledge of both African and European philosophy. There are so many different concepts within there: the Asili, the Omatoroho, the Omatawazo, all of these different things. That's very daunting. You can't give that to just any layman to then go and study with. Right? I think what's going on. So I started thinking, how can I get all of these ideas, these revolutionary practices, the political philosophies of the most successful organizations, the African history. How can I get all this stuff, the psychology, the sociology of the system we're living in? How can I get that to the people in a way that is digestible, in a way that is fun, essentially?
Sure.
Yeah, because most of people, full stop, do not find reading fun, and if they do find reading fun, it's usually novels. So I started thinking around, how do we do this? Thinking it's going to have to be some kind of like it's going to have to be like some sort of short, digestible versions of these great scholarship works. It's going to have to be
brilliant idea.
Lessons for people. And I started thinking, because at the time I was actually doing it with a friend who I sort of took under my wing while I was building my own consciousness, and he was very different from what he became. He's no longer with us for various reasons, but we started sort of discussing amongst ourselves. I was like, okay, so I want to do these lessons. You're on board. He's on board. And we're starting to think, how can we actually get this across to people? We can't really have a physical Saturday school, because in the UK, there used to be, through the 70s and 80s, a large number of Pan-African Saturday schools where they would teach.
Really?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Wow.
This isn't known particularly outside the borders of the UK. And even within the UK, this ain't known unless you're of a particular generation, usually.
Yeah.
There used to be Pan-African Saturday schools that would teach, Black history, that would not only teach African history, Black history, and some sort of small parts of the political and liberatory struggle, but they'd also help with your maths homework, help with your science homework. So lots of them got shut down. Lots of them, as the community, I suppose, got slightly closer to whiteness after the 80s. There was like a whole host of uprisings in the UK, up and down the country. So
I don't recall even hearing about those. Wow.
Yeah, this is information that's not going to be heard by the majority of people that aren't in the UK, and even within the UK, most people aren't going to hear about it. But there were a series of uprisings in the 80s, and the conservative, which is the right-wing government in this country, eventually lost power in the 90s. So the center.
That was the Margaret Thatchers of the world.
Exactly.
She's like one of the most evil white women ever. Yeah.
Yeah. The stuff that she did, from supporting apartheid to selling off all of the welfare state in this country, is just a bit mad. But the Labour government came in the early 90s and almost slightly pulled in the majority Black masses to get slightly closer to the seat at the table. So there was slight assimilation. Almost, I guess a parallel would be kind of like how the mid-60s were in the United States, right? It's not obviously the same thing, but how,
Sure.
the white establishment learned that we can either give these people the visceral assimilation while still secretly oppressing them via various means of the structure and the system, or we can, potentially face a civil war in our hands. Say the former.
Right.
Kind of similar here in the UK. So a lot of these Pan-African Saturday schools, then, due to this slight assimilation, so a lot of them lost funding. A lot of them, the prices for their buildings went up.
Wait, the Pan-African schools were funded by the government there?
No. They were funded by the people, isn't it?
Oh, people. Yeah, okay.
Closer to the assimilation, I guess, and their children are growing up as well. It becomes less of an importance because the oppression is not quite so obvious.
Right.
So taking influence from that, taking influence from obviously the revolutionary scholarship, but we didn't want to have a Pan-African Saturday school where only a set number of people can come. It's going to be it's in one area. You can't move around, right? So we're thinking, do you know what? We're going to have to utilize the internet. It's the best way to get the information across to as many people as possible in the shortest amount of time. Obviously, it's not perfect. There's many brothers and sisters that don't have access to the internet. But in terms of the practicality of it, we thought that was the best way to sort of impact as many people as possible, as quick as we can. And
speaking of that, you are also an author.
Oh,
I just got my books in the mail literally maybe about 30 minutes before you and I were set to talk here. But this is your book, and I ordered 3 of them. And tell us a little bit about this project.
You got all 3, yeah?
I got all 3 of them. Yep. So one of them I'm keeping. The other 2 will be gifts.
Oh, brilliant, brilliant, fantastic. All right, well, yeah, we'll get into the book then. That is an attempt at encapsulating the history of African people, both on the continent and throughout the diaspora, as well as the history of the Black radical tradition, in one
Right.
single volume that is very easy to read,
Yes.
completely illustrated, has maps, timelines in order to aid the learning process. So
Yes.
anyone at their ability level can read and engage with it. It's my attempt at trying to encapsulate an introduction to both.
Yeah, this is awesome.
Thank
Black
you.
Avengers, the heroes of recent history. This is
Yes,
so
yes.
dope.
Thank you, thank you.
Yeah.
It's an attempt to try, and then works like that. They draw people in, especially younger people, and it's written in a way that is very palatable and digestible. But it's also there's enough information in there to even challenge people that consider themselves experts.
Yeah.
So I try to keep the balance. We try and cater to all ability levels because there's no point just speaking to the converted. We have to convert, right? But we
That's
also
right.
don't want to alienate those of us that are already within the deep within the conscious community. So we're trying to encapsulate every ability. So yeah, the book is actually sold out at the moment, but
That's a good thing. That's amazing.
from Friday, it'll be back in stock. So anyone that wants to have a look at it, you can go to boukmanacademy.com, click on the product section. But yeah, so that feeds into the sort of the website. The website's completely free, by the way, for people that don't know us. But yeah, the website we formulated in a way for similar to the book, although the book is a little bit more extensive because you're paying for it. Formulated in a way that is catered to all abilities, all age ranges. So if your 10-year-old wants to learn a little bit about ancient African history, they can look at the lessons on the Nile Valley. If you're thinking, do you know what what's going on with the media? They're using certain buzzwords here. I know what they're talking about, but I can't really describe. You can go to our sociology section, check out coded language. There's all kinds of different lessons that cover.
This is really well done.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
In depth. I can't wait to get into it myself. I mean, I before COVID, I traveled a lot, and that would be my time that I would usually kind of set aside to actually read. Was on flights back and forth. So I'm really, really looking forward to getting into that. And I'm glad that you had the wherewithal to think about all sort of like levels, because there's certainly levels to it. You know what I mean?
100%.
And
I've tried to cover as much of the history of African people as possible. So there's continental history, history in the United States, history in Brazil, history throughout the Caribbean, history in Mexico, history throughout Europe, both ancient history, medieval history, and liberation history. So yeah, hopefully it's a manual to radicalize people that aren't yet radicalized.
That's right. And that's what your work at Boukman Academy and so you describe it as an online school and it's free.
Yeah, it's a free online school with a complete curriculum. You will be eventually able to select the level that you consider yourself to be at. So if you're a complete beginner, you select level 1 for the different lessons that are level 1. If you have some experience, you go to level 2. If you consider yourself an expert on particular subjects, but you're not an expert on others, you can go to level 3 and study those particular subjects that you're not familiar with. So yeah, we have to impact as many people as possible. And I think that was the best way to do it. And yeah, make it look nice, make it draw people in with the nice colors, with the graphics, with the illustrations, because we need to engage with as many people as possible. No, it's just a particular section or the talented 10th, as Web Du Bois might put it.
Exactly. So this is a good segue. I really would like to know from your perspective. So thank you, first of all, for giving us that background sort of. I've always known music is powerful, right? But it's amazing to hear you say that you sort of came into consciousness, if you will, through music and listening to African American music, Afro-Caribbean music with Bob Marley, certainly from Jamaica. And so why is Pan-Africanism important to you?
I was just going to say before I get into that, the music itself has so many sort of Pan-African connections that it's almost like it sort of was like precursor to the eventual liberation politics of Pan-Africanism. So it's almost like full circle. Because if you think
That's
about,
exactly right.
if you think about, the development of hip hop, New York,
Yes,
obviously
of
there's
course.
a Caribbean impact in there as well. If you
Yes,
go through the ages, you get to the West African griots, rhythmically rhyming over a beat of a drum,
yes,
music that comes with that. If you look at it's just, yeah. I mean, I could talk about black music in general for days and days and days, but yeah, Pan-Africanism is important because it is the only solution to our problems as a global people. If we look at the reasons why we are in the situation we are in, it is through a collective European ideology of oppression. It is
and
through
right, exactly.
it's a pan-European project.
And European, yeah.
Whether we want to look at the transatlantic slave trade that gave birth to capitalism, whether we want to look at the literal partition of Africa, where there was Britain, the United States, France,
The
Germany,
Berlin Conference, right?
the Berlin Conference, exactly, of 1884, 1885. That is a pan-European project. There's no
That's
African
exactly
involvement.
right.
So if our oppression is pan-European, even to this day, you think these little skirmishes or inter-race quarrels, such as I don't know, you guys heard much about Brexit and stuff like that, or a lot of the right wingers in the United States that have been complaining about particular, I don't know, Italian Americans might be turning on the generational white Americans, whatever else. There's still this pan-Europeanism that unites them, right? Whether it's through institutions like NATO or the IMF and the World Bank, or if we look at why the UN and how the UN was set up, these are all pan-European institutions and projects, right? So logically, the response to pan-European oppression is Pan-African resistance. And then that's not even going into the history of Pan-Africanism and how every concrete victory that we have had has been through Pan-African unity, whether it's through Marcus Garvey's UNIA, which
that's right. That's probably one of the most successful examples.
He is the most successful Pan-African organizer of all time. I mean, it's actually, if you think about what he did with the limited resources compared to now, and you think about what we're kind of doing,
we should be ashamed of ourselves.
It ain't great, is it? It ain't great. But I know there's a lot of us doing great works in organizations across the world. But in terms of a global unity and a global organizational unifying force, what Garvey did is almost unfathomable. But or we could look at even earlier examples, the Haitian Revolution. That is a Pan-African revolution. Many African-born from different parts of the African continent, whether from the Congo, from Yoruba land, from Hausa land, from as far as Mozambique, coming together to defeat the force of white supremacy, and actually defeating them collectively, utilizing particular African cultural, spiritual traditions. And even Toussaint Louverture, who was one of the leaders of the Haitian Revolution, he actually planned, before he was taken and exiled and starved to death in France, he planned after the revolution to lead repatriation efforts back to Africa and to help free
I did not know that.
of transatlantic slavery from the white raiders. If we look at Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who was the final leader of the Haitian Revolution, we look at the constitution he developed. Every African that reaches these shores is declared free. It doesn't matter where they're from. They could be enslaved in the United States. They could have stolen a boat across the Atlantic and traveled to Haiti. It doesn't matter. They are free. He wasn't saying, there's a lot of sort of divisive white nationalist rhetoric through blackface, where through the diaspora wars, where it's like, oh no, I'm from this white nation, therefore I'm better than you, whatever else. But Dessalines wasn't into any of that. Every African that reaches these shores is declared free. It doesn't matter where you're from. He also said redistributed the wealth to African people across the island. He didn't try and sort of implement his own hierarchy in the same way that the white supremacists did.
Right.
And this is the sort of the crux of the Black radical tradition. This is the crux of Pan-Africanism, and we could literally keep going through history. I mean, even as far as, I know technically some people might actually not call it Pan-Africanism, but we could go far as the Nile Valley civilizations, where Kemet and Kush unified on the basis of their shared culture and history to defeat the Eurasian invaders that had come into the lower portion of Kemet. So every single concrete victory African people have had has been through Pan-Africanism and through seeing ourselves as a global majority with a shared macro culture that can defeat the oppressors that are unified on the basis of their macro culture.
Right.
So,
What do you think? This is good, by the way. I mean, what do you think? I guess when you look at our predicament, whether it's here in the United States, there in the UK, or on the continent itself, and I feel like we talked a little bit about this last week, and you were in the comments when we talked about sort of this neo-colonialism and all of that.
yeah.
What are some of the impediments from your perspective to a successful Pan-African movement now here in the 21st century?
Oh, there's a lot, to be honest. The neo-colonial power. I mean, even if we take it from a sort of propagandist view,
Yeah.
the colonial powers, the neo-colonial powers, have managed through their colonial education systems, which still exist, to convince, if we go to the continent, to convince individual African people that their allegiance is to a nation that has been created by white people,
Europeans, yeah.
feeds directly into the metropole, the European metropole. And they have instituted this idea that if you can get yourself to the metropole, you are therefore a success. That is the metric of success for a lot of African people through the colonial institutions that have been put in place and still remain. And there's no desire for them to change that because it obviously serves the powers that be. If we look at that, then we can also look at the sort of, it's almost like the new COINTELPRO social media when it comes to African consciousness.
Oh, yes. Social media. Oh, yeah.
The amount of nonsense that's given traction on the daily.
Right.
I mean, you can see through it once you sort of start seeing this. It's like a random generator that decides, what should we do today? We can either attack Pan-Africanism, we can create a meaningless diaspora war, we can create a meaningless gender war, or maybe
it's unfortunate, but a lot of that has come out of the United States, the whole diaspora war stuff. So I'm sure, I mean, you're well studied. You probably have heard of the ADOS movement.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And, you know, I don't, because our comments will probably light up here in a minute. So, like, I'm not attacking, you know, the founders or anything like that. I think the problem that I had specifically with them was when they announced, you know, that Pan-Africanism is dead. They literally said that, one of the founders, and made it about being American and the fact that, you know, we have no connection to Africa. And I just thought that if you are trying to organize Black people in the United States, why would you take that route? It made absolutely no sense to me at all. But then when you think about COINTELPRO, it makes perfect sense.
Exactly. And I know I'm kind of technically an outsider looking in on this subject. I don't want to weigh into every of my thoughts, but I mean, we'll just use Malcolm X. I mean, he's one of my favorite revolutionaries of all time. I love Malcolm X, but he's got the quote perfectly. If a cat has kittens in an oven, doesn't make them biscuits.
That's so true. I forgot he said that.
That sort of basically sums it up. But again, it's I don't even blame a lot of the masses that have been enticed by the idea, because again, we've always had this assimilationist versus revolutionary debate, right? Whether we're going all the way back to the 1900s, whether we're going all the way back to the plantation, whether we're going all the way back to just after slavery with, you know, we could have Frederick Douglass versus Martin Delany, how they approach things differently. Skip forward, we've got Garvey versus Du Bois. I think Tony Martin calls him the sort of the premier liberal integrationist at the time.
Yeah.
Du Bois did some fantastic works, but we also have to critique the things that he didn't do very well.
Sure.
You know, whether it's Martin Luther King versus Malcolm X, there's always been this sort of integrationist versus revolutionary sort of struggle going on, and it's sort of reared its head at the moment. And I guess it's being, like you say, it's being utilized by the system that be in order to direct its energy towards the elimination of any Pan-African solidarity.
Absolutely. Well, one thing I did want to point out, because this has come up in the comments already, is one of the things that actually drew me initially, and I don't even think they were calling themselves ADOS at the time. Yvette Carnell has actually been around for a while. She actually used to be a staffer with the Congressional Black Caucus here in DC. And they were focused in a lot on the economics of Black people and how, poor or unwealthy, whatever. And that really spoke to a lot of people. That was their linchpin in how they really organized a lot of people. Now, they certainly weren't the first to talk about reparations, I'm sure you already know. Fighting for reparations has been going on for over a century. Black
Yeah,
people,
exactly.
have been fighting for reparations here in the United States for years. But the piece around economics is something that I believe that those of us who believe in Pan-Africanism have to address.
Yeah.
I don't know what Black people's economic conditions look like in the UK, but I would invite you to expand a little bit on that point.
In the UK, there are many parallels. Most of us grow up in council estates, which basically the hoods of the UK.
Okay.
The difference is, depending on the city, to be honest, the difference is in the United States, the Africans in America, their ghettos are very segregated in most of the places. Like
Of course, yeah.
It's a big divide for various reasons that we won't get into today. Over here in London, which is where I'm at, what would be classed as the ghettos are right next to the rich white areas.
It's like that in DC. Yeah.
Where I'm from, where I live in the estate, it doesn't look good, and there's a lot of trouble around it. But you can literally walk 15 minutes, you get to the second richest borough in the whole of the UK.
Wow.
So everything is a lot. It's like they made a decision to put it was the white workers in with the wealthy whites. Then, as the post World War II immigration was needed, they just decided to put the working Black people into the same areas as the working whites. So the dynamics are a little different because the hoods are right next to the affluent areas. I don't know if you guys know about Grenfell Tower. Did you guys get the news about that a couple years ago? But basically,
so I don't have television at home, so I barely keep up with U.S. media. But no, I'm not familiar with that. So can you share a little bit more about it?
Basically, in the richest borough I think it's the richest borough in the whole of Western Europe, if I'm not mistaken. But because of what I just spoken about with the most affluent people living basically down the road from the poorest and blackest people, there's an estate called Grenfell, and there's a tower block that was there.
People in the comments know what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. There are mostly black and brown people living in this tower block, a council tower block, not the nicest place. But there was a corporation that messed up the whole fire safety system.
Oh, I remember that now.
And so many people perished. Rest in power to them. Damn. And there was huge outrage with that. And I mean, it sort of demonstrates that the richest borough in the whole of Western Europe has a fire where there was no adequate fire safety for the poor black and brown people.
Yeah.
It basically sums up the conditions that we live in this nation. But obviously, it's I don't want to sort of paint the picture that it's as extreme as it is in the United States for the African family in the United States, because I think
it's pretty bad here. Black folks are really in a fucked up situation here, brother.
Exactly. But it's almost like it's gone both ways.
Yeah.
Here, in terms of the mass media internationally, you'll barely hear a peep there, or even black people in this country, right?
Right.
So it's on the radar because there's literally no black person who is, somewhat famous unless they're an athlete, right? There's no real, to make it as a black actor in this country, you have to go to America, and then most people assume that they're American. I'm trying to think of any prominent black politician. There's maybe one or two, but I wouldn't say they're that prominent. There's never going to be a black prime minister in this country. So the extremes are almost both ways. The oppression isn't.
What's the African population there? Native born and immigrant.
And overall, I think it's about 3 million. Or
percentage-wise to everybody else, what is it?
I'm trying to do the quick maths in my head, which is about I think it's about 5% of the UK population for African people in here. Yeah. And we're all concentrated in the major cities, so London, Birmingham, Manchester. that's basically 90% of the African population in this country. But yeah, it's a dire situation here, but I don't want to paint the parallel that's exactly the same as the United States. There are some differences as well.
Yeah. The question about wealth disparities is the United States is still the so-called great superpower with China knocking on the door, but there's certainly a lot of wealth here, and that wealth, as you know, was created largely on the backs of Africans who were enslaved here. And so and unfortunately, the little wealth that was created between the civil rights movement up until 2008, where there was an economic crash by a lot of the robber barons on Wall Street, which none of them have been held accountable, by the way, none of them. The wealth that Black people did create through home ownership and things like that, a lot of that was also evaporated. So we're going into 2050. I believe some of the statistics are saying we're actually going to be at a negative wealth as a people here in the United States. And so usually when things like that happen and get dire, there does become these extremes. You know what I mean? Like people have the extremes around identity and what is supposed to be, or all of that stuff like that. But I'm wondering from your perspective, right? Because I don't have a good grasp of this myself, and I can admit that. Like from a Pan-Africanist perspective, not that wealth should be the goal, but how can we ensure that African people aren't always situated as a bottom caste, not just in the United States, because Black folks are an internal colony here, but really also on the continent where all the natural resources are.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the fact that you just said it there, the natural resources in this planet 100 times over are on the African continent, right? So if that should be the sort of galvanizing force, even if all you're about is economic affluence for yourself and your family, that is the galvanizing force in order to change the situation we're in, right?
Right.
So we can utilize those resources for our benefit. So what do we have to do? We have to organize around that. We need to organize around a globalist perspective, firstly, see that the problem that we all have is the same problem. The solution, therefore, has to be the same. Again, to refer to Malcolm X, if you don't understand what's going on in Mississippi, you won't understand what's going on in the Congo. And you can't really be interested in what's going on in Mississippi if you're not also interested in what's going on in the Congo. They're both the same. The same stakes are there, right? It's the same system. So we need to, if we want to sort of build up our own wealth, we need to protect Africa's resources, because our land base is the African continent. So that should be the galvanizing force for people to organize, even if they're not actually about the entire sort of Pan-African tradition, in terms of culturally, in terms of, ideologically, whether it's, Garveyism, Nkrumahism. People that just want a better life for themselves can get that through Pan-Africanism by the utilization of Africa's natural wealth for the betterment of African people. So I think it's the perfect way and reason. You literally cannot argue against it, even if you're not even about that sort of revolutionary Black radical tradition, right? It just makes sense.
That's right. That's
right. With that comes a whole host of other things that we have to sort of analyze. The fact that there are borders that have been put in place, that were put in place specifically as white colonies, or you could even say as white corporations, considering how many corporations actually owned the land on these colonies. The Congo was King Leopold's private possession. The United Africa Company, which today is Unilever, owned Nigeria, right? So these aren't even countries, they're colonies that can also be described as corporations. So the idea that you can sort of tie yourself patriotically to these nations doesn't make any sense if you just even look at the history. So on both sides, economically and in terms of pride within yourself, Pan-Africanism is the answer. But then the only way to get to that Pan-African stage is through organization, is through the utilization of all of our skills, all of our the small amounts of relatively small amounts of economic affluence that we have, if we just sort of pull together some of that in order to both build up the continent and help out the diaspora when needed, we can get to the point where Africa is able to build itself up politically, economically, militarily, which is very important as well when it comes to power. I mean, the most powerful nations in the world are those that can kill the most people, right?
Yeah,
America today because it can kill everyone else. China is growing because it's acquiring enough weaponry and military foundation is strong enough that it can do a lot of damage. Britain, France, the same thing, right? So we need to on all these fronts.
Absolutely. Understanding geopolitics, I am learning, is extremely important to
everything feeds into each other, exactly. The history, the revolutionary politics, the world politics, how things are today, both the psychology and the sociology, the collective psychology, the sociology of the world, the socio-political sides, it all feeds into each other.
That's absolutely right. So this is good. One of the things that I have noticed since I over the last couple of years, maybe 2 years, I've started to listen to a lot of finance media. And what I've learned through that process is that if you want to know about any kind of policy making, if you want to know like what's coming, listen to finance media. And one of the things that I read about maybe about 6 to 8 months ago is that Africa has 6 of the fastest growing economies worldwide and the youngest population in the world.
Oh, I've heard of I think the youngest population is Mali specifically, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so when you think about that, and for me as a Pan-Africanist, you know, I am starting to think about how can I then use whatever access that I have here in the United States to support what's happening on the continent. Meaning, you know, I have like just recently been thinking about how can I purchase land, you know, in Ghana, like how can I even think about even repatriating at some point, because I don't know if this is the case in London, and I don't know that we're tracking it here in the United States, but I can tell you there have been a lot of African Americans who have left the United States permanently and moved to places like Ghana and Tanzania. To me, I feel like there's so much potential there, so much potential. What do you think about that?
I think we need to 100% connect directly with the continent. I mean, you know, Marcus Garvey, one of his major objectives of the UNIA was to actually repatriate some of the African population back to Africa in order to build up continent, utilizing their skills. So I think that is very important and definitely needed, but I think it needs to be accompanied with the ideology. There is no point almost in going back to the African continent if you have not sort of educated yourself in an Afrocentric way. There's no point if you haven't got the sort of political tools within your mind, the revolutionary tools within your mind. I mean, in an individual sense, there's definitely a point because you're going to have a very good time from what I hear over there. But in terms of actually building up the continent via the lens of Pan-Africanism, you need to go there with an Afrocentric viewpoint. Otherwise, it's just the situation won't change. The fastest growing economies that you talk about, where's that wealth going to actually go? It's not going to help African people. It's just going to be funneled back through the neo-colonial puppets back to the West. So a fast-growing economy in Africa means a fast-growing sort of buffer state for the West, which allows the West to be propped up. So we need to go there, those of us that are actually planning on going there, with the mindset of organizing, the mindset of building for African people, the mindset of, you know, having this Afrocentric ideology within our heads when we go back there. Otherwise, it's just going to be, you know, an influx of the diaspora, but no real changes.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I mean, I actually have a family member who just repatriated to Tanzania, actually. And I remember how shocked I was when he announced it. We were visiting him recently before he moved in Georgia. He lived in Georgia, and he was like, "Yeah, we're moving to Tanzania." You know, you hear like, people talk all this black stuff and black power stuff, and I'm just like, okay, you taking it to a whole nother level. I mean, he's married and he has like 5 children. He literally took his entire family over there, and he's using tools, some of these new technological tools. I actually want to get your thoughts on that too, to create residual income. Because one of the things that folks who have left the United States and moved to the continent, one of the common reflections that I hear for those who return is that you have to have residual income based in the States, because there is not a lot of money to be made, or jobs, or a lot of economics that you can really do on the continent. And so I've noticed how he has specifically been able to run an Airbnb business. He just bought a beautiful home, $30,000, which is not a lot of money in the United States. You're not buying a house unless it's in the show enough hood for $30,000 here. Yeah. You know what I mean? And it's not a house. I wouldn't even get you in the room, so. It wouldn't even get you exactly right. And so I think that what he's doing could be a model, for other folks. And we're already talking about ways we can partner to make some things happen. But what do you think about sort of this great reset? Are you familiar with that idea? Are you familiar with Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, and sort of these oligarchs basically have decided that they're resetting the entire world's economy, and they have leveraged the COVID-19 pandemic to do so?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've seen like some mad statistics in regards to the economy. Like in this country, the biggest bailout until 2008 was when this country paid off the plantation owners back in 1834 in order to, to pay reparations for the loss of property of African human beings throughout British colonies, right? And so obviously 2008. So that was, depending on who you ask, that was either between like 5 billion to 18 billion pounds. Then 2008 banking crash happens, and there's like a huge bailout. It's like something like 200 billion or something. But then I read during this pandemic, up until I think it was the end of last year, so it's probably double by now, there'd been a bailout of 895 billion pounds, which does two things. It shows us the ways in which the economy is completely controlled by Pan-Europeanism, European interests.
That's right.
And obviously there's the rise of the East, China's return to power, but China's bought into the European capitalist system, the global capitalist system, right? So it's not like they're the same sort of Maoist champions that they were half a century ago. They're completely tied now to the global capitalist system. So there's that, and then there's also the idea that we have to almost realize that the economic system isn't actually a real thing. It's a myth. It's not something tangible.
Ooh, whereas ourselves, fiat money, it's made up.
We have the ability to change things in a tangible way. We don't have to. I mean, obviously, unfortunately, in the system, you actually need some money, but we have enough circulating amongst ourselves as a global community to implement the changes we want to see, even on a soft sort of power level. We could get the educational products that we need, like that. We could create our own film studios. We could develop Pan-African films. We could develop films about African history. Soft power can be improved without sort of alarming the powers that be. We can, create our own athletics championships. I saw the United States sprinter, is it Sha'Carri Richardson?
Yeah, Sha'Carri.
She got banned, obviously, for smoking weed.
Right.
But what's the problem with African people saying, well, let's make our own African championship? We want to see Sha'Carri Richardson run. Let's do it, right? We have the economic affluence in the global community in order to do those things. Obviously, if you want to implement real revolutionary change, things get a lot more complex because the likes of NATO and stuff get involved. But if you want to accrue some soft power, we have the ability to do it on sort of utilizing our global economic affluence. And in terms of like the Great Reset, again, that just shows who is in control of this system. And it shows that these people, they hold all of the power in their hands. We think that because we're getting slightly closer to the table that we're never going to sit at, we're somehow getting better off than we were 30, 40, 50 years ago. But we're never going to be getting to their table. And they have so much power, they could just snap their hands. What happens if they want to invade Nigeria tomorrow? We've got no answer, right?
Right.
What happens if they want to, extort the wealth of African people in the United States?
Right.
We can't really do much, right? They have the power, and that sort of shows the fact that they can just be like, you know what? It's getting a bit too much, this inflation. Let's just, calm it down by clicking our fingers and extorting. Let's be honest, where's all of the wealth going to be made up from? Africa.
Africa. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that it's getting dire, the situation in terms of this Great Reset, because one of the goals of the Great Reset is something called singularity, where they want to basically create so-called smart cities. I would encourage everybody that's listening to this to become real familiar with what these oligarchs, these devils really have set up. Their agenda for 2030, which that gives us 9 years, actually less, to try to, mitigate some of this. But there is a goal for them in 2030 to have what's called singularity. And so that's globalism 4.0. And as you can imagine, Tyrone, right-wing people are not having it. Like, they are completely ready to take this country to a civil war because they're calling it communism, right?
Yeah.
They're this idea of, not being able to own property anymore. I mean, it's pretty bombastic, some of the shit.
Funny because
tell me your thoughts.
The United States spent all of the 50s and the Cold War era demonizing communism for it to just come back and bite them. They almost convinced the masses a bit too well of the dangers, the whole Red Scare that was going on. But I think that for us as African people, first I'll say that the capitalist system, it proves how unsustainable it is and how ridiculous it is.
So
people
true.
Speak about the capitalist system being the highest form of human organization. And literally, I've been alive less than 3 decades, and we've already seen 2 mad crashes where the economy is completely folded. It seems to happen every few decades that the economy just implodes, right?
Right. It's unsustainable.
It is a system that on a humanist standpoint, it makes no sense. It makes 0 sense. And that's not even to get into the facts that how many people are deliberately murdered every single day by the capitalist system, whether it's within the colonial metropoles or within the colonies themselves.
Right.
It's a ridiculous system. And again, this shows why it literally is Pan-Africanism or perish, because we have
That's right.
Literally, we're running out of time. Every single week, it seems these days, there's a scientist coming out with a climate change report. They're saying within X amount of years, the whole world's going to reach a point where things are irreversible. The climate's going to implode, and humanity's going to go with it, right? And that is due to the capitalist system that we're living under. So it is literally Pan-Africanism or perish. We can't have Pan-Africanism. What is the point in our Pan-African success occurring during a time when the earth is unsustainable? So we need to implement this right now. This is something that, cannot wait. And I think as well, in regards to Africa and the Caribbean, and to a lesser extent, South America and our African brothers and sisters in South America, the IMF and the World Bank and these other financial institutions, they've got these nations under this singularity already. They have these nations under this global reset. They control their infrastructure. They control their economies.
Ain't that the truth?
What would be their public sectors are completely privatized. What would be their medical supplies completely owned and controlled by Western corporations, disseminated through Western bodies like WHO that are not for African interests. Haiti's just had an earthquake, and you're going to see the responses through all of these so-called NGOs, which are really corporations. For African people, since colonialism, there's been this singularity. So I think for us, it's almost like although
I
they're
love
saying
that perspective.
they're wording it a little differently. They're coming out with the newer technology and everything else. But for us, it remains the same, that our resources, our land, our labor, our people are what are going to be driving this, whatever visceral new economic system they put in place. Because for us, the structures themselves are not going to change, and they haven't changed.
That's right. That's right. Brother Cleo is in the comments. He's like, that's why I'm here. Pan-Africanism or perish.
Exactly.
I'm actually so glad that we're having this conversation. And I think that, the more people hear these kind of conversations about unity of African people in the diaspora, I think that clearly, this has to be used as leverage for us to actually achieve the goal of Pan-Africanism.
Mm-hmm.
It may not mean that everybody will actually be able to go back to the continent, and maybe that's, I don't know if it's a good or a bad thing, but I feel like for those of us who have a desire to go back, I agree with you that it should be from an African centered perspective, meaning that our mindset shouldn't be to go over there and make Africa more westernized and bring in our own sort of Western thinking from the United States.
To make money for yourself. Or
exactly.
Thinking of the the poor Africans as if they are children without agency. We need to. It needs to be a two-way street with us when it comes to.
I agree. I agree.
And that's something Harvey sort of preached heavily when he had, especially when he had his plans that fell through for Liberia. That it wasn't some sort of westernized African civilizing mission for continental Africans. It's got to be a two-way street.
That's right. I mean, well, Liberia was literally created by the United States. I'm sure you know that.
It was
the American Colonization Society.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, it's funny. I had a professor in college from Liberia, and I learned about the history through him. And he's since actually retired from that university and moved back home. He had always said the entire time he was teaching that he never wanted full U.S. citizenship because his whole goal was that he was going back home. And I remember back then thinking, oh my goodness, you don't want U.S. citizenship? Like, oh my God, U.S. citizenship is the best. You don't want it?
Yeah.
I completely get where he's coming from now.
The United States, more than any other country, it seems, has somehow it's got the best nationalist patriotic propaganda on the planet.
Oh yeah,
it seeps into so many people. But again, as Malcolm X said, if you were an American, you wouldn't be catching no hell. So
that's right.
America doesn't see you as American, but somehow so many of our brothers and sisters have bought into the idea that they are American people, and that if they just do this and do that, America will finally accept them. America is at war with you and has been since its inception. Its creation is literally as a genocidal settler colony based upon the ideology of white supremacy. There's no change in that. The whole entire United States has to cease to exist in order for Africans to progress as a collective.
That's exactly right. Well, I can say this, brother. The next 10 years and beyond is going to be very interesting from a geopolitical standpoint. I said earlier that China was knocking on the door in terms of, having the biggest economy in the world and all of that. Yeah. Some economists argue that China already has the biggest economy. But then there are others who say, well, as long as the United States still has the most powerful military, I mean, my whole thing is like, you got to have a military to just bully people, bully the entire world. At some point, it's gonna cease, especially as technology continues to evolve.
Exactly. Yeah, it's like Adam Smith, the famous capitalist. He said something similar to he said, I'm paraphrasing, but he said basically there's going to come a point where the savages have such advanced technology that they're catching up with us, and we can no longer do what we want with them, basically.
Right.
But then you have to look at it from an African standpoint. We, as a global African nation, aren't progressing the same way that the likes of China are. So
it's so true.
We can't sort of jump into this idea that somehow, because the technology around the westernized areas of the world is growing, that somehow Africa's going to be brought up from the darkness as well. It's not going to happen. So again, this dire need, it really is Pan-Africanism or perish. We need to start.
That's exactly right. This is interesting from one of the commenters. I didn't think about it like that, but the Taliban took over Afghanistan in 10 days despite U.S. military power. Well, that's one perspective that you certainly won't hear in the media.
I mean, that whole situation is very complex. I'm not an expert, but I mean, there's a whole, the Taliban were created by the United States. There's a whole, back in the 80s in order to oppose
back in the 80s,
the Russians. So, I mean, there's a whole, that's not the sort of inspiration we need. But I guess if you can take some kind of inspiration in terms of anti-US imperialism, fair play, but we're from a completely different perspective. We're from a self-determination perspective, no involvement of any other outside agencies.
That's exactly right. Well, I want to offer, because we are at an hour, and I want to respect your time. If anybody is watching, I wanted to offer the audience, because I haven't been able to even put all the comments up because it's been rapid. People are really enjoying this. So and people are listening. So if there's any questions that you have for Brother Tyrone, please put them in the comments. We'll take a few questions. But yeah, brother, I've been thinking a lot about what's happening in terms of this next 10 to 15 years. And that's why I'm leaning in more deeply to Pan-Africanism. I'm gonna be honest with you though. I am scared to death that these governments are going to implement a vaccine passport in order to travel. So I'm trying to get to the continent before that happens. And I have to figure out a way around it at some point.
I'm not sure if that, I don't know the news surrounding that in the United States, but I can't imagine that going down too well with a lot of the right-wing rednecks down in the United States.
Oh, it's not going down well. You should see our media. I mean, listen, the social media and like family that I have all over the country. I mean, white people are the ones who are pushing back against a lot of these like draconian measures and things like that to collapse the whole thing into singularity. And so that's the very interesting thing about the United States is that white people have been taught liberty and like having like your own, and not the state controlling everything. They're very much have libertarian values.
It is that illusion of complete liberty.
Exactly.
They've been indoctrinated with the United States propaganda since birth. But I can't, from the outside looking in, I can't see them implementing that, because every time that they've implemented something or attempted to implement something that has been negatively received by the white masses, they've straight away
Here's one question.
For that.
No, that's right. Here's one question from Kofi Campbell. I think you were interacting with this person last week back and forth. So the question is, how will Pan-Africanism solve the economic calculation problem? I'm not sure what do you mean by calculation, but if you want to take a stab at that.
Can you clarify that, Brother Kofi?
Yeah, if you could clarify how would the economic calculation, we want to know what you mean by that. But anyway, here's my brother Quadwo, good brother out of the Bay Area in California. Here's his question for you. It says, can Brother Tyrone comment on the common phenomenon of Black pessimism about Pan-Africanism and African-centered thinking, techniques for expanding the global imagination with our folks? Good question, brother.
That's kind of what Boukman Academy is kind of about. It's about expanding the imagination. It's about implementing, exactly. Utilizing things that are, making education sexy, Afrocentric education sexy, making people want to learn from an Afrocentric perspective by utilizing, illustrations, short, digestible lessons that can be very easily read and understood. I think you're right. But then again, I'm not sure how much of it is, because obviously I'm not there in the States with you guys. I'm not sure how much of it is just social media, because that's how I get most of my information about how the sort of Black masses in the United States are feeling about things. I don't know how much of it is social media and how much of it is actually felt by the everyday people, right? So there's a lot of pushback against African things, whether it be Pan-Africanism, whether it be Afrocentricity, whether it be just even learning about African and Black history that doesn't center whiteness. But I think utilizing various forms of education in order to entice people in, making education sexy, basically, that can help to expand the global imagination and showing people the history. You know, all of our greatest victories have been via Pan-African unity.
Right.
That's just straight
That's
there.
just the fact. Yeah.
You know, even showing from an oppression standpoint, how Pan-Europeanism is what got Europe and the settler colonies of Europe, United States, Australia, etc., to the apex power that it is today.
That's right. That's right. Brother Kofi, I believe it's a brother, clarified his question. So how would goods and
This is basically, this is like, oh, do you want to read out the question, actually? I'll let you read it.
Sure. Yeah, no problem. It says, how would goods and services be produced, owned, and allocated by central planning or voluntary exchange?
Well, this is kind of like the crux of what the UNIA were doing, right? And obviously we know that the UNIA fell because of the perpetrators, the traitors, the United States state. But this is something we have to figure out for ourselves. We need to dialogue about this. How are we going to develop this economic power block? Is it going to be through exchange? Is it going to be through? It's not like a cut and dry answer. This is the way to do things. This is the whole point. We need to dialogue and build a completely concrete plan of action. We need to. Sorry, I'm distracted by what was on the screen there.
Sorry. Yeah, I go back up to that one.
Yeah. We need to basically dialogue and engage. And there are many brilliant minds when it comes to the economic sphere that are African. What we need to do is develop minds that can see it from an Afrocentric perspective. So when they learn about these things, they have African interests at heart. They're not furthering white interests, right? So this is basically, this is a discussion and a dialogue that the global African community has to have. There is no sort of right or wrong answer for this, or for a lot of the things that are going to be occurring. But I'd say the blueprint would be Garveyism and what Marcus Garvey and the UNIA actually achieved, and how they developed their Black Star shipping line, how they developed their laundrette systems, how they developed their Negro World newspaper, how they developed their community businesses. That would be, for me, the blueprint.
I love it. That's a good answer. I mean, it's definitely not cut and dry. I mean, hell, if we all had the answers, would we still be in this predicament, right?
And the fact that there is no one answer. There isn't one answer. You know, we must be doing this and this.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah, I have another friend of mine who considers himself a Garveyite, and he's doing a lot of good work. You know,
I mean, of course, if we could somehow, this ain't going to happen, but if we could somehow create an Afrocentric, super trained military that could go into the country and actually seize some of these resources, and then actually build or get Afrocentric thinkers that are experts.
We're supposed to keep that for after the show. We're going to keep that conversation for after the show.
In an ideal world, that could be a possibility as well, in order to acquire a stable economic base for the African people.
That's exactly right. It's Brother Cleo. So the people, I know Cleo personally, and also Brother Quad. Well, this is a good question. So Dr. Manago would like to know, he says, ask the brother, well, what about Black/African mental health? How are we going to embody so-called Afrocentricity when we don't like or respect being Black or being African? Now, that's a good question.
I think, again, that comes down to a lot of that is the educational side of things, learning about the history of how the world is, how it came to be. But again, there's in terms of the mental health side, there is a sort of crisis, and we have to sort of balance the crisis, particularly with African people in the West. How much of it is the Western system institutionalizing African people, and how much of it is the Western system causing mental breakdowns within African people, within the African psyche? Because there's a differentiation between the two. Black men in particular, particularly in this country, I'm sure it's the same in the United States. We're even more overrepresented in the mental health institutions.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there, if you read through the history, there has been a deliberate, systemic way of
targeting Black men,
targeting Black men in particular, but also Black women, and institutionalizing them within the mental health system in order to basically destroy any kind of organizational efforts. This happened with the Rastafari movement, utilizing the ridiculous studies on cannabis, which all of a sudden white people are starting to love and sell and make money off.
Right, of course.
For it. But I think in terms of the sort of not going too deep into specific mental health problems that individuals within our community may face, the sort of overall development of an Afrocentric way of thinking when people don't actually respect their Africanness, it comes down to a lot of the time education, and people have to be willing to learn in order to change. Certain people, if they make up their minds, it's going to be very difficult to get through to them. But all we can do is, as those of us that are actually somewhat conscious on this subject, is show people the history, show people the liberation fights that have occurred, and teach them as best as we can. So again, that's why I think it's so important to get people as young as possible, while their minds are still fresh and malleable and free from the decades of propaganda that have been put out to distance African people.
It's an onslaught every single day. I've actually, as you know, I've been an organizer for a while, and I observed very early on in my organizing experience within Black communities here that we definitely needed an African-centered approach to how to deal with mental unwellness in the community. And it wasn't necessarily received well by other sort of mainstream organizers. And that's when I learned that people weren't really as serious as they purport to be about actual Black liberation. Go ahead. What were you about to say?
I was going to say, in terms of the long term, we do need to actually develop an African-centered way of approaching particular problems within our community, whether it's mental health problems, even physical health problems. But that is something that would be more long term, and specific experts within that field, whoever the new Francis Cress-Welsing and Amos Wilson are in our communities, those are the people that need to sort of develop an African-centered framework for dealing with these problems within our community. But in terms of the sort of the overall anti-Africanness that resides within a lot of our communities, that comes with basically showing people the way through educational programs, ways, and teaching them different ways, and whatever that particular person or group of people may feel, trying to combat that with a particular medium of education that shows them the true history and shows them. But again, like I said, they have to be receptive in some way to the learning, otherwise it's a waste of time.
That's exactly right. This has been so fun.
To add to that as well, I think to utilize some of the tenets of Garveyism, propaganda is very important. I can kind of link that back to when we were talking about the soft power. We saw how much Black Panther almost riled up a lot of African people in the West to be slightly more African than they were, right? Over a 6-month period, and then it all went back. If we can get these types of things disseminated, African-centered Black history films or mythological stories even, or in different mediums, suddenly African people globally would want to be associated with Africa again. Because if we got to make Africa cool in the mind's eye of the collective Black population.
Edutainment,
Exactly. Great term for it.
Yeah, absolutely. Brother, this has been so fun. I want to encourage people, again, if you have not copped the book, they will be back in stock in a week, you said?
2 days.
2 days, actually. Okay, go to the website. I put the website in the comments earlier, boukmanacademy.com. But also, you have something else coming up on Saturday. You want to tell the listeners about that?
I expect actually quite a few people that are watching this. I really want you guys to get involved, because it's just a really fun exercise. It pays to be knowledgeable about Black studies. So basically, me and my brother from the States, Dewan, we do what's called Afro Trivia once a month, which is essentially a Black Studies quiz where you have the potential to win $100 cash, like straight into your pocket. Basically, it's 5 questions on Black studies. So it can be about Black history, it can be about liberation politics. It could be, you know, what is the name of this? Who is the name of that? Anything to do with Black studies, right? And if you get 5 questions in a row right, you win the prize. You come on our Instagram live and you go straight into competing. And it's basically first come, first served. And it's usually quite a fun time. And it gauges the community's knowledge, actually, and if they've been paying attention to our lessons.
So it pays to know Black history, global Black history, right?
We're trying to, global Black history and politics and liberation. We're trying to sort of, it's part of the ways of making education sexy again. You know, people start thinking, oh, so if I learn about this Pan-African stuff, I can actually get paid for it. Oh, okay, well, maybe I'll start paying attention. Maybe I'll start getting into this. So it's just a simple way of drawing people in, getting people, and it's a fun competition as well. So, and if no one wins, then we add it to the next pot for next week, so for next month.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
Wow. So everybody make sure make sure you go, and this is happening on Instagram. So if you have an Instagram account, go and follow Boukman Academy. It's in the ticker down there on Twitter and on Instagram. But this one, this contest is called Afro Trivia, right?
Yeah, and it's this Saturday.
This Saturday, and what time?
I think it's 4 o'clock Eastern time, 9 o'clock over here. But we've got a post on it. If it's the first post on our Instagram, so just check that out. It's got all the details on there.
Got all the details. So make sure you all support the brother. That's good work, and we appreciate you. Get the book. The online school is absolutely bananas. It's great. I mean, so for a lot of parents, if you're doing homeschooling, it's a resource for you. So check it out. Even if you're not doing homeschooling, supplement your child's education, what they're getting in these public food systems in America. So make sure you all check out that website. There's a lot of free tools there. And join Afro Trivia on Saturday. Brother Tyrone, this has been great. Thank you so much. Yeah, very proud of you. Very proud of all that you're doing. In the spirit of Pan-Africanism, let's make sure we have you back at some point. But yeah, definitely thank you. Continue to do good work, and hopefully we'll get a chance to meet up on the continent at some point.
Oh yeah, it has to be done, 100%. All right, thank you.
Absolutely. Take care. Good night, everyone. Join us next week.